And now we bring you Killer Wives, Episode 6, Deadly Tea. These are the facts behind the case on Angelina Rodriguez, who lethally poisoned her own husband. Isn't trust a bitch? Los Angeles, California. Famous for the Griffith Observatory, the Hollywood sign, and the murder of one Mr. Jose Rodriguez. On the advice of the closest person in his life, Jose is asked to take out a rather large life insurance policy. That person was his wife of only 5 months, Angelina Rodriguez. The victim of today's show, one man, Mr. Jose Rodriguez, an Air Force veteran turned special education teacher. He meets one woman, Mrs. Angelina Combs, an administrative clerk working for the same school as Mr. Rodriguez, the Angel Gate Academy. The couple, said to be madly in love with one another, end up getting married in less than 2 months of that meeting. 5 months after his wedding day, Mr. Rodriguez was found by police face down in a pool of his own blood, seemingly dead of natural causes. Question: how does a new bride go from promising to love, honor, and cherish to hate, dishonor, and murder in less than 5 months? Hi, this is Charles Rivers, and welcome to another edition of Killer Wives. On this show, we feature wives who follow a particular pattern of marrying, killing for a motive, and covering up those murders with fanciful stories of innocence. And this case is no different. On September the 9th of the year 2000, Miss Angelina Rodriguez was successful at killing her husband Jose after 2 previous failed attempts by poisoning his tea. He trusted her. After being poisoned, Jose would barely hang on through the night. By the morning, the sun would set in Jose's life permanently. But let us rewind the clock to what caused this homicide. We'll drive back to the day the couple first met. Angelina, a native of Montebello, California, met her husband, known as Frank, in February of 2000, while they were employed at the Angel Gate Academy in San Luis Obispo. Many would cite Angelina as a person on a mission to make Frank commit to marriage. Frank had been almost in mourning due to a failed marriage of some 14 years. This, we believe, made it easy for a new woman to come into his life if she showed the slightest bit of interest in him. Whether he knew it or not, this was Angelina's chance to get him. Hook, line, and sinker. Frank and Angelina were married on April the 8th of that same year. Shortly after the wedding, Frank got an offer for a teaching position in the Los Angeles Unified School District, and the couple moved to Montebello, California. The career change and the move seemed right. More than that, this was a teaching position Frank had always dreamed of. Everything in his life seemed headed in the right direction for a change. Could this be the best thing that ever happened to Frank? Or the worst thing ever? Angelina's then 9-year-old daughter, named Autumn, from a previous marriage, lived with the couple in their quaint new home. That year, she had just celebrated her 9th birthday. This is the only year she will know Frank. This is the last year she will ever know Frank. One day, Angelina received a random mass mailing insurance offer in the mail. After receiving this, she began to pressure Frank heavily to insure his life for $250,000. Miss Angelina Rodriguez would name herself as sole beneficiary of that policy, which is something she had a history of doing, followed by death. And Mr. Mickey Marciano, the insurance agent who received her call, agreed to meet with them at the house to discuss the new policy and its requirements. Angelina would miss one of those requirements of that policy. This would be her undoing. He drove out to meet with the couple on July the 15th of the year 2000. On this date, Frank has less than 56 days left to live. During that particular meeting, their insurance agent heard Frank ask Angela why she felt that they needed the insurance, in light of the fact that they were already covered at work and also through his National Guard unit. But Angela was adamant, and she explained to Frank the benefits of life insurance and why she felt they needed more of it. Frank still hesitated, but then he told their agent to write it up. Frank was then scheduled and took the necessary physical examination on July the 18th, just 3 days later. On that day, Frank has only 53 days left as a human being to live. But finally the policy was approved on July 26th, a mere 8 days later in record time. Also at the time, Frank and Angelina discussed insuring her life for $50,000, but that policy was never finalized. I believe it was never finalized because it was a ruse to make Frank believe she wanted her concern to be equal. But what kind of equality weighs $50,000 to $250,000? Angelina's best friend? A one Mrs. Palmyra Gorham. She had met and befriended her at a beauty salon years earlier. They were classmates. Palmyra testified that after the couple's marriage, Angelina often visited her in Paso Robles, California, a town over 205 miles north, without Frank in attendance, and expressed unhappiness with their marriage. Sometime around mid-June or mid-July, Gorham and Angelina had a conversation at Gorham's home in which Angelina was telling her how unhappy she was with Frank. Mrs. Gorham said jokingly, "Why don't you just divorce this one like you divorce all the other ones?" You see, this was not the first marriage for Angelina, but her fourth. Angelina Rodriguez was married 3 times before she even met Mr. Jose Rodriguez. She was married in chronological order to these following gentlemen. Mr. Hector Gonzalez for 1 whole year. She was married to Mr. Tom Fuller for 3 full years. And finally to Mr. Don Combs for 1 year before meeting and marrying Jose. Each husband knew Angelina for less than 1 year when they married her. Let us begin with her patterning of marriage with Mr. Tom Fuller in 1990. In 1990, Angela enlisted in the Air Force. She met Thomas Fuller, an Air Force soldier, while they were stationed in Colorado. Thomas married Angelina 3 months later, which would become her modus operandi for marriage. The couple would go on to having 2 babies to complete the family. Autumn was their first daughter, and she had by all counts a normal childbirth. However, their second daughter, Alicia, was born prematurely and with an abnormally slow heart rate. Angelina's next get-rich-quick scheme would change the dynamics of her relationship to her husband and the Fuller home forevermore. When next the Fuller family went away on vacation to include husband Tom Fuller, Angelina, Autumn, her older daughter, and Alicia, the baby, to the state of Michigan in late 1992, this would bear out. When they were sitting at a local restaurant, a female customer in passing noticed the pacifier that baby Alicia was teething on and approached them during lunch. She wanted to let the Fullers know that she was pretty sure that this particular pacifier was part of a safety recall. This newfound recall knowledge would seal baby Alicia's fate. Shortly thereafter, Alicia's mother Angelina bought a $50,000 life insurance policy on her little baby's life without telling her husband at all. It was also around this time that she sneakily looked into the Orthodontic pacifier recall lawsuit, and she wanted to be a part of it. The international company Gerber Foods recalled orthodontic pacifiers because the pacifiers sometimes separated from the nipple. They did this only as a safety precaution because they believed that babies could choke on a piece of the pacifier if the parts were separated. It was then that Angelina sought to acquire at least one of these recalled pacifiers in a location that had yet to remove them from the store shelves. She then waited patiently until her then husband, Mr. Fuller, had left town on a business trip to choke her baby Alicia with the faulty pacifier. While her eldest daughter was being in another room of the home, Angelina made her play at her own little daughter's life. At some time that morning, she was successful at killing her own baby, away from the prying eyes of friends, neighbors, and her husband, who is currently out of town. Angelina, then feigning concern, called 911 for her then dead 13-month-old baby Alicia. On September the 18th of 1983, the 911 operator put a call for service to the fire department, the police department, and the paramedics. First to arrive on scene was firefighter David Mandeville, who was said to be surprised to meet Angelina outside, waiting for the ambulance instead of with her baby inside of the house. He says typically where a child or infant is choking, the parents are with that child at all times. At least she could have brought the child outside with her while waiting for firemen. Inside the house, firefighter Mandeville removed a piece of plastic from Alicia's throat and started CPR. Paramedics arrived soon after, but they could not save Alicia's life. Too much time had elapsed from incident to arrival scene. On that day, Deputy Sheriff Ralph Ginter found the pacifier pieces in Alicia's room. Sheriff Ginter accompanied Angelina with her baby to the hospital. Now, upon arrival, Angelina asked Sheriff Ginter for the plastic pacifier backing. She wanted to keep it, and that, in her words, that the manufacturer or company that she purchased it from is going to pay. And she didn't want this to happen to another child. At the town morgue, on the other side, Dr. Wallace Carroll performed baby Alicia's autopsy. Dr. Wallace concluded that the baby accidentally choked to death. He had no idea that her mother had purposely killed her. Angelina, hearing this, knew she was in the clear. With this knowledge, Angelina and Thomas hired an attorney named Mr. Barry Novak to sue Gerber. Attorney Novak sent 2 pieces of the pacifier to Dr. Wolfgang Noss, a professor at the California Institute of Technology in Pasadena, California. Dr. Noss wrote Angelina that he did not believe the pacifier broke accidentally. He said in a letter to Angelina at the time that the ultimate failure, as it now appears and documented in these photographs, is not consistent with that scenario. Her attorney, at the behest of Angelina, then pivoted and mailed the pieces to a new lab and to the University of Akron. The professor, Dr. Gary Hammond. So, this is going to be her second opinion and her second chance at money. Dr. Hammond disagreed with Dr. Noss's summary. Dr. Hammond believed the pacifier failed because it was degraded in some way. When this second report was submitted to Gerber International, the company did not know about Dr. Noss's original report to the contrary. So what happened? The Gerber International Corporation settled with the Fullers, and Angelina and Tom received $710,000 for her daughter's accidental death. This was in addition to the life insurance payment that Angelina took out separately on her now deceased baby's life without telling her own husband. The Fullers divorced after baby Alicia's death. Her husband at the time says, "There are times when all I want to do is see his wife dead. Then there are times I'm just not 100% sold on it. And then maybe I'm in denial that I could marry someone who could have done something like that." After her divorce, Angelina replaced her daughter Alicia with a house, a boat, and a car. But at her trial, she had this to say: "If I'd wanted to kill my daughter, I could have let her die from the bradycardia." But 21 years later, down the road, prosecutors investigated baby Alicia's death to present as evidence during Angelina's murder trial. They portrayed Angelina Rodriguez as a serial killer motivated by insurance payments. And by now, all the evidence that I presented, you could easily imagine this for yourself. But imagination for a jury would not be enough. Angelina Rodriguez denied killing her daughter, but nobody believed her. Circumstantial evidence, or maybe too many coincidences. There was ample evidence that Angelina murdered her daughter. See, about 2 months before Alicia died, Angelina took out a life insurance policy on the baby without telling her then husband, and named only herself the primary beneficiary. This circumstance alone strongly suggests she murdered her daughter to collect the life insurance proceeds, just as she later murdered her husband to collect on a life insurance policy that she insisted he take out. You see, Angelina was a lone adult in the house when the baby choked to death. Sure, her daughter was in the house, but her daughter had no knowledge of what was going on. And rather than remain with the baby until emergency help arrived, as the jury would reasonably find a mother would do, she left the baby inside and met the firemen outside of her house. Now, after her daughter died, she seemed more concerned about collecting the pacifier parts and suing Gerber International than about losing her baby. Thomas testified that Angelina had previously heard about Gerber's recall of the pacifier, on which the baby later choked. Additionally, Dr. Noss's testimony strongly supported a finding that the baby's death could not have been an accident, especially when combined with Angelina's deposition testimony. Her testimony said that she continually checked the pacifier by pulling on it. His opinion was especially credible given that Angelina herself had retained him. Now, at this point later in the game, Angelina marries Frank Rodriguez, the person who was the victim of today's story. So when her friend asked her earlier, why doesn't she just divorce him like she did the others? Her response was, no, this one has got a life insurance policy. Bingo, that's her modus operandi. And that might be worth something to her, she said. She said something like, if I were to kill him, at least I'd end up with a little bit of money. Later, Gorham's mother joined the conversation they were having, and the two told Angelina a story about a woman who had tried to kill her husband by giving him oleander tea. Remember this, people. Oleander tea. Gorham did not take the conversation seriously at the time, The oleander, or Nerium oleander, is considered by many to be the most poisonous plant in the world. All parts of the beautiful oleander contain poisons, several types of poisons. Two of the most potent are oleandrin and nerin, known for their powerful effects on the heart. An oleander poison is so strong, in fact, that it can poison a person who simply eats the honey made by the bees that have digested oleander nectar. Unlike some toxic plants, the oleander is poisonous to animals as well as humans alike. A single ingested oleander leaf can kill a child. Ingestion of oleander results in diarrhea, vomiting, intensive stomach pain, drowsiness, dizziness, and an irregular heartbeat, low blood pressure, and often death. If the victim should happen to survive the initial 24 hours after ingesting it, his or her odds of surviving increase dramatically. For successful treatment, the patient is induced to vomit. His or her stomach may be pumped, or he or she may be fed activated charcoal to absorb as much of the poison as possible. Now, you will notice some of these same symptoms in her husband, Jose, shortly. A day or so after this conversation, Gorham and her boyfriend spoke with Angelina about a dog that had bitten Gorham's son, and Gorham's frustration with the police response. At one point, the boyfriend commented that we could just soak some of the hot dogs in antifreeze and throw it over the fence. When Angelina asked why, Gorham told her that we had seen something on TV, that antifreeze has a kind of sweet taste, and it's really colorful. So it's like bright pink or green, and that children and animals would drink it without thinking twice. Now, the symptoms of antifreeze poisoning are subtle in nature. Within the first 12 hours of the ingestion of antifreeze, a person who has been poisoned accidentally or not might act drunk. The central nervous system gets slowed down. And this is according to information from the U.S. Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. So these are the next symptoms I want you to watch out for in Frank. Because Frank is about to be poisoned twice in the same week. Now, the harmful compound in antifreeze is ethylene glycol, a sweet-tasting and odorless substance that is used in a variety of mechanical processes because of its low freezing point and high boiling point. It's chemically not far from common alcohol, but the human body reacts to two different substances in vastly different ways. Oppositely, antifreeze is absorbed into the body fairly quickly, where it crystallizes. That's when the real damage begins. As quickly as 30 minutes after the chemical is ingested, you're in trouble. When ethylene glycol breaks down in the body, it forms chemicals that crystallize, and the crystals can collect in your kidneys and can affect kidney function. Ethylene glycol also forms acid chemicals within the body, which can change the body's acid-base balance and affect your nervous system, lungs, and heart. Frank was about to be in heavy trouble. Now, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, as little as 2 ounces of antifreeze can kill a dog. 1 teaspoon can kill a cat. And 2 tablespoons of antifreeze can be hazardous to a child. It is said that within 24 to 72 hours of a person who has ingested a significant amount of antifreeze can die as a result. Most commonly, death is preceded by kidney failure. It can also cause heart issues, and if you live, permanent brain damage. A couple of weeks after this conversation, Angelina was at her home in Montebello. Her friend Miss Gorham spoke with her on the telephone. Miss Gorham heard a blender running in the background and asked what Angelina was doing. Angelina responded that she was making Frank a special milkshake. Now, in the past, Angelina had told Mrs. Gorham that Frank liked to have milkshakes when he was ill. So Gorham asked Angelina if Frank was sick at the time. Angelina responded, "Not yet." Now enter From stage right, a new character in the midst of suspects. Mr. Loran Moranis was Mrs. Gorham's nephew. Now, although he was older than she, he had just gotten out of jail. So on July the 17th of that year, and began a relationship with Angelina that became sexual on August the 26th of that year. On this day, Frank has only 15 days left to live. Angelina was said to have visited her lover regularly while visiting her friend in Paso Robles. Beginning while Frank was still alive, she was doing this. Mr. Moranis testified that about a week before Frank died, Angelina was with him in Paso Robles. She told Mr. Moranis that she had left some kind of gas on in the garage in Montebello. This was because that when Frank would walk into that garage, he would die. She said that either there would be some kind of explosion in the house, or he would go in there and pass out. On the day she had the conversation with Mr. Moranis, Frank had less than 6 days left to live. Because he did not want to get involved, Mr. Moranis did not tell investigators about this conversation. Mrs. Angelina Rodriguez was a real piece of work. She used tea to sicken him, and Gatorade mimicking the same color as Antifreeze to finish him off. Gatorade with the color to mimic Antifreeze, and a glass of nice hot tea laced with oleander. Concerning that morning, Officer Sharp testified that Angelina's crying seemed rehearsed or kind of forced. Now, although it was audible, there was a lack of tears, he said, and as soon as he would talk to her, ask her a question, she would immediately kind of snap out of it and answer the question real quick. He says, and in my experience, usually someone who just lost their husband, they're very difficult to speak with and to communicate to. Odd. A wife that would act that way. Now, the initial autopsy on Frank's body did not reveal the cause of death. This is good for her and bad for her at the same time. The body contained no signs of trauma. Frank was 41 years of age at the time when he died and had generally been in good health. At 10:17 a.m. that morning, less than 3 hours after removing Frank's body from the house to the morgue, Angelina placed a call to the life insurance agent and left a message for him to call her back. This was more important than her dead husband. When the life insurance agent returned her call a short time later, she reported her husband's death and inquired about getting the $250,000 payment. Odd. It was then that the life insurance agent informed her that the company would need an official death certificate showing the cause of death before anything else was done. Now, he also explained that when the death occurs during the first 2 years after the policy is issued, the company will investigate the claim to determine if it is a legitimate claim. See, so she did not know when she signed that agreement, thinking that she was going to kill him, that they would investigate anything under 2 years. So during the conversation, the life insurance agent noticed that Angelina spoke without emotion. Notice, he is the second person to say this about Angelina. He said it was sort of matter of fact the way she was talking to me and explaining everything. She didn't cry. She didn't hesitate in any way. She didn't lose any train of thought. In keeping with the duties, the insurance agent reported Frank's death to the insurance company that same day. Now, he had several other conversations with Angelina over the next few weeks. At frustration, he says. These conversations in which she repeatedly asked when she would get paid. He kept advising her the company needed a cause of death, which would be listed on the death certificate. No insurance company can move forward without this document. Now, a Mrs. Rebecca Perkins, Frank's sister, his actual sister, who lived in Florida, learned of Frank's death from her mother, not from his wife. So Janet Baker is Frank's mother. So around noon, the day of his death, 9 a.m. California time, 6 hours after his death, she telephoned Angelina and asked what had happened. What happened? She wanted to know about her brother. So Angelina responded, he drank too much. Miss Perkins was surprised because Frank did not drink alcohol at all. Angelina went on to say that Frank had been sick on Wednesday and Thursday, and she took him to the hospital on Friday. She said Frank had died of a stomach infection. A short time after this conversation, Perkins called Angelina again. This time, Angelina told her that the people at the Angel Gate Academy gave him cookies and Gatorade, and that killed him. And months ago in June, that it was the students at his middle school that had tried to poison him. Odd, very odd wife. She can't keep her stories together. So when Miss Perkins asked why someone at Angel Gate Academy would want to kill Frank, Angelina said that she was terminated. That Angelina had lost her job, that she was terminated. And she left on a bad note. And therefore, they didn't like Frank. And so they wanted to kill him. People can be terminated at jobs for cause without, but I never noticed that somebody wants to kill you because somebody else's wife is terminated. Now, Mrs. Perkins testified that during both of these conversations, Angelina had no emotions. This is the third time someone has said this about a dead man's wife. Frank's other sister, Mrs. Shirley Core, spoke with Angelina the day after Frank's death. Angelina told his sister at that time that she wanted to cremate him and sprinkle his ashes at a beach that she said was their favorite place to go. Later, Angelina told her that Frank might have a military burial. In another conversation, Angelina told Coors that an officer at Angel Gate Academy had killed Frank. Why? When Frank had gone there for a meeting. She said the officer put some kind of poison in his cookies and Gatorade. Remember? The Gatorade that she used? Now, Coors asked Angelina how someone could poison another person. Angelina said, there are many ways. For example, one can make tea with oleander. Here's to you. On Tuesday, September 19th, Coors drove with Angelina and others in a limousine to Frank's funeral. On the way, Angelina pointed at some bushes on the other side of the road and said, "That's oleander." You're giving yourself up, lady. You're giving yourself up. You know, personally, what strikes me in each case we receive and review is the fact that children in these homes end up losing both parents, one to death and the other to prison. So nobody wins. Now, a Mrs. Elaine Nash, an employee with the Midland National Life Insurance Company, spoke with Angelina several times beginning on September the 28th of that year regarding Angelina's efforts to collect the insurance money. Mrs. Nash told Angelina the company needed a death certificate stating a cause of death, and it would take about 4 to 6 weeks to process the claim after they received the certificate. She also explained that the company would conduct its own investigation because the death had occurred within 2 years of issuing the policy. Insurance companies are no fools, and they know situations like this happen, whether it's a wife or husband. They're always going to investigate it. You can't buy insurance one day and kill somebody the next. Now, Angelina told her the autopsy was being done, but the toxicology had not been completed. Later, Angelina would request that Mrs. Nash fax her the claim form so she could get the ball rolling, as she said, on the insurance payout. Ms. Nash informed her that she could not do so in the case of a contested claim. Remember, it's being contested. Mrs. Nash also declined another of Angelina's odd requests to verify to a real estate agent that the funds would be available so she could buy a brand new house. Now, back in Montebello, police detective Gregory Wowsey was the original investigator into Frank's death. On September the 11th, the Monday after Frank died, Detective Wowsey received a telephone call from Angelina. What was she doing? Angelina was deciding to ask about the coroner's office and how it would dispose of Frank's body. Detective Wowsey told Angelina that the coroner had not determined the cause of death, and any information they could receive regarding what Frank might have been ingested would help to narrow the possibilities in that case. So they're in the process now of trying to drag out what she might have done. Angelina told him that she believed someone at the Angel Gate Academy in San Luis Obispo might have poisoned him. She said that earlier that year they had blown a whistle on somebody who was suspected of committing child abuse on one of the students or children up there. And because of that, some people got fired, some people got reassigned, and she felt that there was some animosity towards her and her husband over this one incident. She said Frank had gone to the academy some days before his death to chaperone disadvantaged youth who were going there. But she never thought about the story every time she explained it to a different detective. During this conversation, Detective Wildsey was struck by Angelina's lack of emotion. Lack of emotion. How many times have we heard this? This is now the fourth person who is testifying that Angelina is heartless. On September the 14th, the case was referred to the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department and assigned to Detective Brian Steinwan and Sergeant Joe Holmes. Detective Steinwan testified that Angelina had been a suspect in Frank's death from the beginning. But they did not tell her that. They pretended to believe her story that someone at the Angel Gate Academy had poisoned Frank in order to try to get her to talk and provide information. In fact, they never suspected anyone at the Angel Gate Academy of poisoning Frank. So beginning on September the 14th, the investigators had numerous conversations with Angelina that they surreptitiously tape recorded. Now, relevant portions of several of the conversations were played back to the jury in Angelina's trial. Angelina told investigators she believed a man at the Angel Gate Academy named Charles Chad Holloway had poisoned Frank. Mr. Holloway is the one that she thought that she had blown a whistle on at the academy. It was just a vendetta she had against this guy. He had really done nothing. So she said that she and Frank had blown the whistle on Holloway for inappropriate behavior with some of the students at the academy as a chaperone. When he returned home, he told her that someone there had given him Gatorade and cookies. Angelina also talked about the life insurance policy and said the company would not pay the claim until it had been advised of the cause of death. She asked if the investigators could help get the coroner's office to do what was necessary to determine the cause of death, so she could receive the money. This truly is a wife sent from heaven. Anybody that could have their spouse dead in less than a short period of time and worry only about money has got my vote. Now, on September the 26th, Mrs. Janet Baker, Frank's mother, informed Sergeant Holmes that Angelina had said something about oleander. This was the first mention of oleander as a possible poison in the case. Detective Steinwan informed the coroner's office of the possibility of oleander as a poisoning. Now, however, no test for oleander was conducted at the time, apparently because very few laboratories could perform such a test. But where did she get it from? Where could she have got the oleander? A large oleander bush, easily accessible to Angelina, grew over the fence in the backyard of her Montebello home. It was already there. During this time, Angelina frequently asked the investigators about efforts to determine a cause of death because she wanted to collect the insurance money. Every conversation she ever had to anybody was about expediting the insurance payment so she'd get paid, just as she did in her daughter's death years earlier. Now, the investigators explained that the coroner's office had been unable to determine the cause of death and that they needed to know what to look for as a possible poison. As a ruse, they stressed that it would be very useful to know what the poison might have been. They're about to put this woman, they're about to hem her up, I'm telling you. On October the 19th, before 9 a.m., while driving, Sergeant Holmes received a call on his cell phone from Angelina's cell phone. Angelina told him she had just received a telephone call. Telephone records later showed that in fact Angelina had not received any incoming telephone call on her cell phone that morning before she called Sergeant Holmes. That was the first lie that day, of many lies she had told. Sergeant Holmes told her he would call her back. He did so when he returned to his office, so he could record the conversation. This officer was no idiot. Angelina told him that shortly after 8 a.m. that morning, she had received a telephone call while she was driving from a man who refused to give his name. She said the caller ID was blocked. She said the man told her he had talked with Holloway. Holloway had told him, "They can't pin this on me." The man also asked him about antifreeze. Angelina reported to the detective that she did not know how the man had gotten her cell phone number. This was the investigator's first information that antifreeze might have been involved. After this conversation, Sergeant Holmes asked the coroner's office to check for antifreeze as a possible poisoning. So now, the toxicologist and the coroner are going to check for two poisons, oleander and now antifreeze. Dan Anderson, a toxicologist with the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office, testified that the results of the initial test on Frank's body had been negative, except for the presence of Vicodin. Vicodin, for those of you who don't know, is a narcotic for pain, high risk for addiction and dependency. Now, Vicodin can cause respiratory distress and death when taken in high doses or when combined with other substances, especially alcohol. Now, that created a problem because when checking for the presence of drugs, one must look for something specific. There is no general toxicology test for everything. If a test for the most common drug is negative, trying to determine what might be present is like looking for a needle in a haystack. Now, for example, one must look specifically for ethylene glycol, the main chemical component of automotive antifreeze, if you're going to find it. If you're not looking for it, you may not find it. So, in order to find it, you need to be looking for it. Now, after Angelina mentioned antifreeze to the investigators, specimens from Frank's body were examined for ethylene glycol. And what did they find? All samples showed the presence of a fatal amount of that chemical. Later, testing also showed the presence of oleander. Dr. Richard Clark, a toxicologist with the Poison Center at the University of California, San Diego, testified that ethylene glycol is poisonous, but tends to taste sweet and can easily be mixed with Gatorade. That's what she did. He also testified that oleander, commonly found along Southern California freeways, is also poisonous. It can be served as a tea and mixed with another liquid to disguise its bitter taste. And if you drink a lot of tea, you might have just thought that the bitterness was the tea, unlike coffee. Now, after examining documents in the case, Dr. Clark opined that Frank had died of ethylene glycol poisoning. Specimens from his body contained 5 and 6 times as much of the chemical as is needed to kill one person. Now, Frank would have had to receive the fatal dose within 24 hours before his death, and most likely within 6 to 7 hours after reviewing his records at the hospital. So right after she and he were released and she read those notes, she set out to kill Frank. Now, Dr. Clark also opined that Frank could not have had in his system at that time the ethylene glycol that his body later contained. So between the time he was at the hospital and the time that they examined the body of death, it was not in his system before he left the hospital. Frank's symptoms at the time that he visited were consistent with oleander poisoning. Dr. Clark testified it is hard to say what role the oleander played in Frank's death, although it could have played a part. Frank must have last ingested oleander within 24 hours before his death. One Dr. Agbana Chinwa, who had performed the original and conclusive autopsy, testified that he later re-examined the body and found evidence of ethylene glycol in the kidneys. In his opinion, Frank died of ethylene glycol and oleander poisoning. Moving right forward, on December the 12th, Detective Steinwall told Angelina that he was going to question Holloway. You remember the person that she's blaming? She's blaming everything on Holloway. The guy who works at the academy. She's trying to get him fired. She's trying to get him arrested. She's trying to get him in trouble. So he said he's going to question Holloway about the case. He did, in fact, speak with Holloway, but only to obtain cooperation and not as a suspect. He arranged for Holloway to telephone Angelina with the investigation surreptitiously listening in. The next day, December the 13th, Holloway called her. Acting pursuant to instructions, Holloway asked her why she had told police that I poisoned Frank with antifreeze. Angelina replied that he needed to talk with the investigators. About 1 minute after this conversation ended, Sergeant Holmes received a 911 page, meaning important from Angelina. He called her back. She told him she had just received a call from Holloway in which he said, well, they'll never be able to catch me anyway, and you better watch your back. In fact, Holloway had said nothing like that to her. Recordings on both December the 13th and conversations were played to the jury. In December, the investigators informed Angelina of the results of the antifreeze testing. In various conversations, Angelina asked the status of the investigation regarding Holloway now, she was really about to step into it this time. So as a ruse, the investigators told her that one weakness in their case against Holloway was a lack of evidence. Evidence of what? Evidence that Holloway had known in advance that Frank would be coming to the Angel Gate Academy. You see? So how did he know he was coming to the Angel Gate Academy on September the 5th? All police officers will tell you in cases that poisoning requires advanced planning. They explained, and Holloway could defend against a poisoning charge by claiming he had not known Frank would be there that day. They stressed to her that it was important for them to obtain evidence that Holloway had received information in advance that Frank would be there on January 19th, 2001. On January 19, 2001, Sergeant Holmes told Angela that oleander had been found in Frank's body and that the cause of death and death certificate would be ready in a few weeks. Angelina asked if they had yet received any evidence that Holloway had known in advance that Frank was coming to the Angel Gate Academy. Did he know that he was going to be there on September the 5th? Detective told her they had not. She told him that when she worked as an admin there, she always received a fax saying who was coming. Now, it's about to get deeper. On February the 5th, 2001, Sergeant Holmes received an anonymous fax addressed to him at the Homicide Bureau. It contained no cover sheet and indicated it had been sent from Staple Store number 702. On the first page was written, "Urgent, Detective Holmes. I mailed this to you. Why is Chad still free? Thought maybe you did not get it. Here it is again." The name Chad. The name Chad obviously referred to Holloway as his middle name. So she's still trying to get Chad in trouble. Now on this fax, the next 2 pages appear to be printed document concerning a faculty orientation at the Angel Gate Academy. On the second of these pages was the handwritten name F. Rodriguez, which was her husband's name. Now, later Sergeant Holmes received in the mail at work an envelope containing a copy of the same document he had received by fax. So exact same document. On February the 5th, 2001, and a note stating, "I found this in the 2nd Platoon's locker in Sergeant Holloway's papers. I figured this is how he knew Sergeant Rodriguez was coming to the San Luis Obispo." She thought she covered every angle in getting Holloway arrested. So she had manufactured a fax. She had sent a fax. She had followed the fax that was sending a letter to the detective. On the letter said, "I hope this helps fry the bastard." On February the 6th, 2001, the investigators drove to Paso Robles where Angelina had moved after Frank's death, intending to arrest her. While driving, they received a page from her. Sergeant Holmes called her back. He told her about the fax. He said he didn't know where it came from. He said it was important for them to know who had sent it. She said she knew nothing about it. She also asked whether they were going to arrest Holloway. She added that she would like to be present when they did, to see the expression on his face. After Angelina was arrested, the investigators searched for Pacifier home. Pursuant to the search warrant, they found in her purse a piece of paper containing numbers and computations, apparently calculations regarding how she would spend the insurance money plus the accumulated interest. This woman was a real piece of work. Her whole existence in marrying Frank was money, and she was chasing money to the bitter end. So the insurance money plus the interest, she had already factored in how she was going to waste it, and that she expected to receive this. Also in her purse was a napkin on which was written the sheriff's fax number, the number to which anonymous fax received by Sergeant Holmes had been sent. The purse also contained a fax confirmation sheet from Staples Store number 702, an original of the fax Sergeant Holmes had received on February 5th, 2001. On this original copy, however, the handwritten name F. Rodriguez was in red. What does this mean? A forensic document examiner testified that this name was written in original red ink and was not a copy from some other document. Now, the Los Angeles school administrator who coordinates the Angel Gate Academy program, so she's in charge of these type information and faxes being sent and received. She testified that normally the school district would not provide the academy with the names of teachers who merely accompany students to San Luis Obispo and return the same day, which is what Frank did. So his name would not have appeared on that document that day. She said the printed document in the fax Sergeant Holmes had received concerned a session that started on September the 5th. It contained the names of teachers who would stay there, but not of those who just rode the bus, which Frank did. Now, the printed document, which would not normally contain a handwritten name, like the one on the fax, was the last testimony. This woman has really sealed herself a fate that she cannot back out of. Detective Steinwin and Sergeant Holmes arrested Angelina for Frank's murder on February 7, 2001. Evidence including a tape-recorded telephone call that Angelina made to Gorham on March 27, 2001, after she was in jail, showed that while in jail, awaiting trial, Angelina tried to dissuade Gorham from testifying against her. In the recorded conversation, Angelina told Gorham that based on what Gorham told the investigators, she could be considered as an accomplice in the case. She suggested that Gorham might be arrested if she did not change her story. Gorham responded that if she changed her story, isn't that just gonna make it look worse? Angelina said that people retracted all the time. They retracted statements all the time. She said Gorham could say she had found me with Conrad. Now, Conrad was Gorham's boyfriend. She added that that would be enough for you to snap, as if once she caught them two together, that would make her mad, and that's the reason that she said her initial statement. She also said that this is getting bigger than anybody can imagine, and it doesn't need to be. Do you see what I'm saying? She reiterated that Gorham knew what I was doing, and you didn't stop me. When Gorham noted that she had not been arrested, Angelina said they're still investigating, and they're still asking a lot of people questions. So she tried to scare her into changing her story and not testify against her, as if she's going to be named in this murder plot, even though they just had a brief conversation. Now, other evidence showed that in May 2002, while still in jail awaiting trial, Angelina tried to solicit fellow inmate Gwendolyn Hall to arrange Gorham's murder. When Hall was released from jail shortly thereafter, Angelina first offered to pay $20,000 for Gorham's murder, then increased the offer to $30,000. Defense evidence. Angelina cross-examined prosecution witness and through stipulation presented evidence regarding telephone calls between Angelina's home and Gorham's home during the Labor Day weekend of 2000. So she's trying this time to hem up her own friend and get her evidence in the case thrown out. The apparent purpose of the stipulation was to impeach part of Lorraine Moranis' testimony. Now, during the penalty phase of the trial, the prosecution presented evidence that Angelina murdered her infant daughter in 1993, and additional evidence that she solicited Gorham's murder. So she's painting this person as a serial killer. As evidence, death of Angelina's daughter on September 18th, back in 1993. You remember, this is her little child, way back then, a little baby. Angelina's 13-month-old daughter, Alicia, which is Autumn's younger sister, the girl that's still alive. She choked to death on the Pacifier, manufactured by the Gerber Products Company in her crib, which was at that time in the family's home where they lived at. Now, Angelina, at the time, married to Thomas Fuller. Thomas Fuller was Alicia's father. He was away on a business trip, and Angelina was the only adult in the house when Alicia died, besides her daughter, who was 2 years old at the time, in another room. So, after they had divorced Thomas, Gerber settled a lawsuit, remember I told you, back then, paying $710,000. Angelina received 60% of that settlement, and Thomas, her husband, 40%, what remained after deducting attorney fees and expenses. Now, Angelina received more than her husband Thomas because she had been present at Alicia's death and suffered emotional trauma, or has said to have been. Now, when Detective Steinway searched Angelina's home after her arrest, he found a copy of Dr. Noss's report containing the results of his examination of the Pacifier. This information would be damning. As a result of this discovery, Detective Steinway investigated further into the circumstances of Alicia's death. Dr. Noss testified as an expert regarding the failure and fracture of the polymers being plastic, which includes rubbers. In 1994, Barry Novak asked him to examine the two pieces. He did so and prepared a report containing his findings and opinion. At trial, Dr. Noss described the two pieces he examined. A pacifier, he said, is typically made up of what one calls the shield. That's the hard part, which is the hard part that stays in the front of the mouth, right? Then something some people refer to as a baglet, or the nipple, so the two parts, which is in the baby's mouth. And the nipple is characteristically out of natural, clear-looking rubber. And in this case, the nipple part had broken off and away from the hard part, the shield. And now, the doctor, when he examined those pieces, he didn't think that this could happen. So, specifically, the separated nipple had broken off or torn off, he said, from part of the nipple that remained attached to the shield. The distance, he said, from the shield to the point of the rupture where the separated nipple had torn away was short. Listen, from the shield to the nipple, the cut was short. That was too close to that to be with an infant's mouth. He said approximately 2 or 3 millimeters. In Dr. Noss's professional opinion, the fracture he observed between the two pieces could not have been caused either by a baby chewing through the pacifier or baby's repeated sucking action. He based this opinion on the nature and pattern of the tear, or the amount of force necessary to cause it, and the fact that tear was near the shield rather than on some part of the nipple. A baby would actually touch the part of the nipple before ever reaching the shield. Based on his visual and microscopic examination of the pacifier, he believed that some external trauma or tool was responsible for failing this nipple. One possibility was something rolling over this. See, rolling over back and forth. Some external agent that caused large force in that region. That would be responsible for this kind of complex fracture pattern, he said. Now, he suggested it might happen when a chair or some hard object rolls over the pacifier like this. That might be the cause. Now, he gave two options in this case. He said a tool, such as pliers, imagine a pair of pliers, could also have caused this tear. Dr. Noss was aware that Dr. Hamed, remember the second doctor in the investigation before they were approved for the life insurance, he said that Dr. Hamed believed the nipple might have had an initial cut. You see, somebody might have cut it in advance. That a baby's normal use could have exacerbated, causing the rubber completely to separate from the shield. Dr. Noss believed this was not possible due to the large amount of force that would have been needed to cause the separation. In his opinion, the ultimate failure, as it now appears and documented in these photographs, is not consistent with that scenario. The prosecution presented portions of Angelina's testimony in the lawsuit against Gerber. She testified that she had checked the pacifier when she first received it. She did this to make sure there were no cracks or evidence of wearing. So she said that every time she checked that pacifier from the time she bought it to the time her child sucked it on a daily basis, she would pull on it to make sure it was okay. So she actually damned herself. About once a week, she tested the pacifier bulb by pulling on it, she said. Exhibit 2. Solicitation of murder while in jail. The prosecution played for the jury tapes of jail conversations between the inmate Gwendolyn Hall, remember her cellmate, her name was Gwendolyn Hall, and Angelina on May 10th and 11th of the year 2002 that were recorded with Hall's explicit permission. See, they didn't record it behind her back. Hall was in on it with the police. So in this conversation, which Angelina solicited Gorman or her best friend's murder. Now, in the May 10th conversation, Angelina told Hall that the killers could get one or two ways. They could do it in one fashion. They could do a robbery gone bad. Or they can make it look like a boyfriend gone mad. She had a lot of stories. Angelina gave Hall the address of the directions to Gorham's home. Remember her best friend? She gave the directions to her home. She knew where she lived in Paso Robles. When Hall asked how she would be paid, Angelina responded that this is one thing I'm still trying to figure out. So she thought the best way to transport or transfer the money between the two of them would be to give her the 25 grand, but that she couldn't take it immediately out of her bank account after the insurance because somebody would be fishy. She thought that she would go to Las Vegas and withdraw $25,000 out of her account before the Vegas trip, and that would make it not look suspicious. Angelina added that the house is so old, her friend's house so old, that if it blew up from a gas leak or something, it wouldn't surprise anybody. She also said that for somebody to go in and shoot them in the head while they were sleeping. This is her best friend. She said if this happened, it would not be surprising. She said a pillow could be used to muffle the sound. She said there is an alley behind the house. They could use it to get away. Now, Hall and Angelina agreed that when the job was finished, Hall should send Angelina a little girl card signed Happy Birthday, B-I-R-F-D-A-Y, instead of birthday, and also write Love Cuz. The misspelling was intentional, so the message would be clear. In the May 11 conversation, Angelina asked Hall whether these guys would be bright enough to figure out how to make it look like a suicide. She discussed other ways to kill her best friend Gorham, such as doing an overdose, using cyanide, or making a gunshot look like a self-inflicted wound. She suggested that Hall drive because they needed a brain. They're going to have somebody to tell them what to do. This is crazy. I know it is. She told her, it's your investment. Put it that way. It's your decision. Now, they again discussed how Hall would be paid. Angelina also suggested they go to Gorham's house in the morning and watch her leave to take her kids to school. In this way, when she comes back home, she'll be by herself. So she's going to also make somebody else's children parentless, not just her children. Now, Los Angeles Sheriff's Detective Patrick Valdez, who was assigned to investigate this matter, had heard from Hall that Angelina might also be soliciting others to kill Gorham. Anxious to prevent Gorham's murder, he decided to try to convince Angelina that the murder had been accomplished. Now, I don't know if you guys have seen a lot of cases like this before, but they'll stage a murder to protect somebody from actually dying. So on May 21st, 2002, he instructed Hall to tell Angelina that she had found someone to act as a middleman between Hitman and Hall. He gave Hall the fictitious name as Antonio Davis. Antonio Davis would be the name of the middleman. And he gave the fictitious address. That same day, Angelina released $60 from her jail account to Antonio Davis. At Detective Valdez's direction, Detective Steinway and another officer drove to Paso Robles. With Gorham's cooperation, they took photographs of her apparently dead body. I'm sure you've seen these type cases before, right? So they took photos of her dead body with a fake gunshot wound to the head and also fake blood. Detective Valdez also arranged to have Detective Jose Mija pose as Antonio Davis. Remember, the fictitious middleman. Now, the fictitious middleman will speak with Angelina at jail on June 8th of 2002. They are trying to let this woman get a little bit more rope and a little bit more rope, and she's going to hang herself. So, the approximately half-hour interview was videotaped and played back to the jury of the jail conversation. Angelina and Detective Mija, posing as Antonio Davis, they sat divided between a plexiglass window. I'm sure you've seen jail conversations and interviews. And they spoke through a telephone. Now, in addition to speaking with one another, they communicated by writing notes and displaying them through the window. Something jail inmates often did because they knew their conversation might be monitored. Angelina wrote separate notes on a single sheet of paper that she folded so that only one message would be read at a time. See? So, Detective Mija showed Angelina 2 photographs of Gorham's apparently dead body. See, she's dead. He then held up a note saying, "How do you want to take care of it?" What he was talking about was money. How are they going to be paid? And the note also said, "These guys are asking about the money." Angelina wrote a note back saying this: "I thought Gwen was obviously had stopped it. So she's now lying that her jail cellmate, who she told to get somebody to kill her friend, had stopped the assassination. She's trying to renege on the money for the murder, made it look like suicide." Then she displayed a second note saying, "My star witness." Later she wrote, "Best friend of 6 years." Verbally, Angelina stated, "This is what I told her." She then displayed a note saying, "When out as soon as insurance is in about 45 days, I give to Gwen." Later she verbally stated, "I think that about as long as it takes," and displayed another note saying, "It's up to how long insurance takes." So she's promising to pay them once the insurance money gets in from Frank's dead body. Angelina displayed another note saying, "I thought she was joking." Then she showed again the note saying, "My star witness," after the conversation about the money. Now, at this conversation, Angelina was searched, and the piece of paper on which she had written the notes was seized by a guard. An address book containing Antonio Davis' fictitious address was also found in her possession. Defense evidence. Angelina testified in her own case saying she said in all her life, none of her relationships had ever worked, and that she had only 2 happy experiences: the birth of her 2 little girls. History that her relatives supplied indicated that Angelina was a very attentive, loving, and supportive mother. In Dr. Vickery's opinion, Angelina would be a model prisoner who would get along with the guards and the other prisoners in the institution. Mrs. Angelina Rodriguez, born in 1968, is an American woman from Montebello, California. She was sentenced to death for the September 2000 murder of her 4th husband, Jose Frank Rodriguez. She was also accused of killing her infant daughter in 1993 by suffocating her with the Pacifier. In October 2003, Angelina Rodriguez was convicted of first-degree murder with special circumstances, murder for financial gain, and attempting to dissuade a witness. Now, she was not convicted for the charge of soliciting murder of her friend while she was in jail. So, the following month, the jury rendered a verdict of death. Now, Angelina was formally sentenced to death by lethal injection on January the 12th of the year 2004. But today, she is still alive. In her sentencing in Los Angeles County Superior Court, Judge Williams Pounder stated that she killed her husband in an exceptionally cruel and callous way, and that her guilt had been proved to an absolute certainty. Now, the judge herself was shocked. She had been through almost 2 trials. One that would sentence her to death, and one that was sentenced through the Supreme Court again in death. So the judge said, in the past 20 years, I have never seen a cold-hearted more person. Despite her conviction and death sentence, Angelina argued her innocence and maintained that her husband's death was a suicide. Angelina Rodriguez was awarded a new sentence hearing in 2010, but was resentenced to death in November of 2010. Her most recent appeal was denied by the California Supreme Court. Angelina remains on death row at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, California. Now, her friend, Palmyra Gorham, Angelina's friend who lived in Paso Robles, California, remember her? She passed away on August the 24th, 2004. Mr. Frank Rodriguez was born in New London, Connecticut. He was the second of 6 children and grew up in Lincoln, Illinois. His family said he was fun-loving and took care of his siblings. He was a peacemaker and wanted everybody around him to be happy and to get along. A U.S. Navy veteran, he also served in the Army National Guard. He was assigned to a military academy in San Luis Obispo, California, there to work with troubled youth. That's all he wanted to do. A job he thoroughly loved, he said. Frank's last assignment was as a teacher in Montebello, California. Frank, in this case, was a victim of a calculated murder for monetary gain. Tune in next week. We bring you another issue of Killer Wives.